There are names that echo through history, names etched in stone, whispered in prayer, and thundered from mountain tops. But among them all, one rises like fire above the desert, Moses. Before kingdoms rose, before laws were carved, before a sea split at the command of a man's voice, there was only silence. And then, from that silence, a cry, a child hidden in a basket, floating down the river of an empire that killed the sons of his people. That child would grow not as a slave, but in the courts of Pharaoh, among gold and gods of stone. He would wear linen while his brethren wore chains. But he was not born for Egypt's throne. He was born to shatter it. Moses was not merely a man, he was a turning point in the world's divine narrative. The one through whom God would speak face to face, the one who would walk into fire and not be consumed. He would challenge the greatest king on earth, not with armies, but with words and miracles. He would stand on the edge of the impossible and lift his staff, commanding the waters of the sea to part. He was chosen to receive the commandments etched by the very finger of God and to lead a nation not only out of bondage but into a covenant. He did not just guide them through wilderness. He reshaped the soul of a people, carving the idea of freedom and divine law into the bedrock of human history. But Moses' journey was not paved with glory. It was forged in pain. Betrayal from his people. Rebellion in the desert. Isolation on the mountain. And the crushing burden of carrying God's word to a people too afraid to hear it. He would weep for them. Plead for them. Stand between them and divine wrath. His hands would tremble from lifting stones too heavy for any man to carry, yet he bore them not with pride, but obedience. Three of the world's great faiths, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, hold him in awe. He is revered as lawgiver, liberator, prophet, and friend of God. His name is invoked in synagogues, churches, and mosques. His story spans empires and generations, but his voice still speaks across deserts, mountains, and hearts. This is not just the tale of a man. It is the unfolding of miracle after miracle, of divine confrontation with tyranny, of a shepherd who stood before a king, and of a voice that once came from a burning bush and changed the fate of nations. This is the story of Moses. And it begins, not with thunder, but with the quiet weeping of a mother pushing her son into the Nile, trusting the river to return him, and trusting heaven to call him. Birth and early life. Long before he stood on Sinai, long before the plagues and the parted sea, Moses was just a child born into danger, cradled in hope, and delivered by destiny. The land of Egypt was vast, gilded, and cruel. Beneath its towering monuments and sprawling palaces, a nation of slaves toiled under the whip. The children of Israel, descendants of Jacob, once honored, now shackled. Pharaoh, fearing their numbers, issued a decree to break their future. Every male child born to the Hebrews was to be thrown into the Nile. And in this time of mourning, a child was born. His mother, Jochebed, looked upon him and saw something divine, not merely the face of a son, but the mark of heaven. The child glowed with peace. His eyes carried depth far beyond his days. She could not surrender him to death. For 3 months, she hid him, cradling him in shadows, nursing him in silence, praying over him with every breath. But a mother's arms could only shield for so long. So, with trembling hands and an unbreakable faith, she wove a basket of reeds, sealed it with pitch, and placed her infant son into the Nile, not to drown, but to be delivered. The river that swallowed the sons of others would carry him to destiny. The basket drifted gently, as if guided by unseen hands, and came to rest among the reeds near the palace of Pharaoh himself. There, the daughter of the very king who ordered his death stood above the water, and when she opened the basket, she was struck not with suspicion, but with compassion. She named him Moses, meaning drawn from the water. Thus, a Hebrew child, condemned by decree, was raised in the very courts of Egypt. Moses grew surrounded by wealth, wisdom, and warcraft. He was schooled in the sciences and languages of empire. He walked among nobles, dined with priests, and stood beside generals. Pharaoh saw him not as a threat, but as family. Yet within Moses stirred a fire that Egypt could not tame. He saw his people labor in chains, their backs scarred, their faces bowed. Though he wore royal linen, his heart beat with the cries of slaves. He was not blind to their pain. He was not deaf to their groans. Something deeper called to him, a truth older than the pyramids. He did not belong to Pharaoh's world. One day, that truth would erupt. But for now, he waited. He watched. He learned. He grew not only in stature, but in resolve. Moses' early life was not a tale of coincidence, it was the orchestration of heaven. Born in the shadows, raised in the palace, protected by divine will, and prepared in silence for a destiny greater than any throne. For the child drawn from water, would one day divide it? World at that time. The world Moses was born into was a world divided between the oppressor and the oppressed, a kingdom of golden thrones built on backs bent in slavery. At the heart of it stood Egypt, the empire of empires, unmatched in might, saturated in mystery. Its pyramids touched the skies. Its temples breathed incense to gods of stone. Its pharaohs ruled not only by sword but by fear, wrapped in the illusion of divinity. To the Egyptians, their king was not a man, but a god incarnate, Ra's living heir, the sun's will on earth. The Nile River, the very lifeblood of the land, flowed through this civilization like a vein of power. It brought fertility to the fields, wealth to the markets, and served as a silent witness to both coronations and executions. It shimmered under the sun while bodies, those of children, of slaves, of rebels, sank beneath its surface without a trace. But beyond the grandeur and ritual of Egypt's temples, a silent genocide was unfolding. The Hebrews, descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, had once come to Egypt during a time of famine, welcomed under the honor of Joseph. But generations had passed. Pharaohs had forgotten. And the Israelites, once guests, had become slaves. Their population, growing swiftly, sparked paranoia in the throne room. The ruler feared their strength, not their weakness. So, he devised a plan not of open war, but of quiet erasure. Every Hebrew male child was to be drowned at birth. The order rippled through the land like a dark wind. Mothers wept in silence. Fathers buried rage behind bowed heads. And in the shadows, hope withered. Beyond Egypt, the wider world groaned in its own chaos. The known civilizations Babylonia, Assyria, and Hutti flourished in commerce and conquest. Towering ziggurats rose in Mesopotamia. In Canaan, city-states warred and fell. Trade routes cut across deserts, laden with spices, scrolls, and slaves. The gods of men were carved into walls, spoken of in blood rituals, and feared more than loved. But none of these gods spoke. None answered when called. None stood beside the oppressed in silence or sorrow. They were distant, deaf, or imaginary. The spiritual world was fractured. Divination replaced revelation. Power replaced piety. And kings declared themselves divine while the people starved at their feet. In this backdrop of brutality and decadence, the children of Israel carried a flame, faint, flickering, but still alive. The stories of Abraham and his covenant. The dream of a land promised but forgotten. They sang the names of El Shaddai and Elohim in secret, telling tales by firelight of a day when God would remember them again. They did not know when. They did not know how. But in the depths of Egyptian soil, among bricks and straw, a cry had gone up. And far beyond the clouds, heaven had heard. This was the world that raised Moses, a world of false gods and real chains, of kings who ruled as tyrants, and a people waiting not for a revolution but for a deliverer. Signs of prophethood. Before the burning bush, before the plagues, before the sea split in two, there were whispers. Unseen signs. Quiet warnings. Invisible fingerprints of heaven on the life of Moses. He was no ordinary child. Even in infancy, those who looked upon him felt an unfamiliar pull, a serenity that silenced grief, a strength not born of muscle, but of something older, deeper. The moment Pharaoh's daughter laid eyes on him, her heart bent like reeds in the Nile. She was the daughter of the most powerful man in the world, a man who had ordered the death of every male Hebrew child, and yet she chose to save this one. Why? Because Moses did not cry like other babies. He watched the world with wide, knowing eyes. Even the women of the palace whispered, "He sees too much." As he grew, he learned the language of royalty, the codes of war, the sciences of the Nile. But Egypt could never tame his soul. Unlike the other noble sons who reveled in their power, Moses watched the Hebrews. He walked among them in secret. He listened. He studied their sorrow. And though his lips were slow and his tongue unsure, his heart burned when he saw injustice. The first true spark came the day he witnessed an Egyptian beating a Hebrew slave. The moment was electric. Moses did not calculate. He did not plan. He acted not with the training of a warrior, but with the reflex of a protector. In that instant, he crossed an invisible line between Egypt's courts and Israel's pain. The man fell dead. Moses buried the body in the sand, but the truth could not be hidden. It was not the act of violence that marked the sign, it was the weight Moses carried afterward. He didn't flee merely from punishment. He fled from a calling he could feel rising like a storm. Into the wilderness he ran. Into Midian, far from palaces and pyramids, where the sand burned his feet and silence sharpened his soul. There, too, the signs followed. He arrived at a well and rescued the daughters of Jethro, a priest of Midian, from hostile shepherds. Again, instinct, courage, and protection rose in him. He lived as a shepherd, married Zipporah, and learned the ways of patience. But the wilderness could not quiet the fire that flickered within him. Every night, he would look to the stars not with wonder, but with unrest. Why had he survived the Nile? Why had Pharaoh's daughter spared him? Why had he felt that surge of righteous fury when witnessing injustice? Why did the name of the God of his fathers still echo in his mind, a name he had never heard, but somehow always known? Then one day, while leading his flock near Mount Horeb, he saw it. A bush aflame, burning, yet not consumed. It was the final sign, yet it had always been there, waiting. Every event in his life had led him to this moment. For Moses had been chosen not in the palace or the wilderness but from the womb. He was a prophet before he knew the word. And now, the voice was about to speak. Call to prophethood. It began with fire, but not a fire that consumed. In the vast silence of the Midian wilderness, under the shadow of Mount Horeb, Moses wandered alone with his flock. The sky above was cloudless, the wind dry, and the sand below his feet hot from the sun. He had grown used to the stillness, used to being a shepherd, a husband, a father. The man who once walked marble halls now walked among sheep and silence. But the silence was about to break. As he moved deeper into the mountain's edge, a glimmer caught his eye, a flame, glowing in the distance. It danced without smoke, flickered without wind. A bush burned, yet its leaves did not curl, its bark did not char. Moses stopped, narrowed his eyes. "I will go closer," he whispered, "and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up." But as he drew near, a voice thundered not from the sky, but from the flame. "Moses! Moses!" He froze. The fire spoke his name. Not once. Twice. Like a heartbeat. Like a calling carved in eternity. "Here I am," he said. And then the voice of God said, "Do not come any closer. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground." With trembling hands, Moses obeyed. The wilderness was no longer wilderness. The mountain had become a sanctuary, the dust beneath his feet, sacred. The one who now spoke had shaped the stars, split the seas, and remembered promises made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." At these words, Moses fell to the ground, hiding his face in fear. For he knew, beyond any doubt, that this was no dream, no vision. This was the presence of the living God. Then came the divine purpose, the revelation that would reshape history. "I have seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard their cry, and I have come down to rescue them. Now, go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt." The words rang like thunder. Moses' heart pounded. He, a fugitive, a man of slow speech, a shepherd in exile, he was being sent to stand before the most powerful king on earth. Moses answered not with pride, but with terror. "Who am I, that I should go to Pharaoh?" But the voice responded, "I will be with you. And this will be the sign that I have sent you: when you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this very mountain." Still, the weight of the task overwhelmed him. Moses feared rejection, mockery, failure. "Suppose they ask me, 'What is his name?' what shall I tell them?" And then, from the flame, came words never heard before, words that would echo through eternity, "I am who I am. Tell them, I am has sent me to you." God revealed his eternal name, Yahweh, a name of presence, of being, of unchanging power. He was not merely a God of a mountain, or a God of fire. He was existence itself, before time, beyond time. Still, Moses hesitated. "But they will not believe me." So God gave him signs, not just for Pharaoh, but for Moses' own heart. He told him to throw his staff on the ground. It turned into a serpent, alive and writhing. Moses fled in fear. "Stretch out your hand and take it by the tail," the Lord commanded. And when he did, the serpent returned to wood. Then God said, "Put your hand inside your cloak." Moses obeyed. When he pulled it out, his hand was leprous white as snow. God told him to put it back, and it was restored. "These signs," God declared, "will show them that the Lord has appeared to you." Yet Moses still wrestled with doubt. "I am not eloquent. I am slow of speech and tongue." And God replied, "Who gave man his mouth? Who makes him mute or deaf, seeing or blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go. I will help you speak, and will teach you what to say." But Moses, overwhelmed, pleaded once more, "Please, Lord, send someone else." Then the anger of the Lord burned, not in fury, but in firm mercy. "Your brother, Aaron the Levite, is he not a good speaker? I know he is coming to meet you. He will speak to the people for you. You will be like God to him, and he shall be your mouth." So it was settled. God had chosen Moses. The shepherd would become a messenger. The fugitive would become a liberator. The man of slow tongue would carry the word of the Almighty to kings. When Moses descended from the mountain, he no longer walked as a shepherd. He walked as a prophet carrying the fire of heaven in his soul. And from that moment forward, the world would never be the same. Message and teaching. Moses was not merely a messenger who delivered commands. He was a prophet who delivered identity. His message did not only guide a wandering people through a desert, it carved their soul, shaped their destiny, and linked earth to heaven. When Moses returned to Egypt with Aaron at his side, he carried not just the authority of God, but a mission far deeper than political freedom. He came not to simply break chains but to reveal who God truly was. The Lord, the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, has sent me to you. That was his message. Not rebellion. Not philosophy. Not revolution. Revelation. He taught the Israelites that their suffering had not gone unnoticed. Their groans had been heard. God was not distant, nor silent. He was near, and he had not forgotten his covenant. As plagues struck Egypt and Pharaoh's power crumbled, the message was clear: Yahweh was the true God, not Pharaoh, not Ra, not Isis, or Horus. The plagues were not random disasters, they were signs, each one dismantling an Egyptian deity, exposing falsehood, and proclaiming the supremacy of the one God over creation. But Moses' message did not end with deliverance. When the Israelites crossed the Red Sea and stood on the other side, free for the first time in centuries, they did not become a nation simply by geography, they became a nation by covenant. On Mount Sinai, Moses received the 10 Commandments, engraved by the very hand of God. These were not just laws, they were a sacred framework for living. A blueprint of holiness. A call to justice, mercy, discipline, and worship. They taught the people to reverence the unseen, to honor life, family, truth, and community. Moses taught the people how to pray, how to offer sacrifice, how to keep the Sabbath, and how to recognize the divine presence not just in thunder or flame but in daily life, in obedience, in moral clarity. He delivered not only commandments, but a vision, to be a holy people, set apart, reflecting the light of God to the world. The Torah, the law revealed through Moses, was not simply legislation, it was a sacred trust, binding the people to their Creator. It taught the Israelites that faith was not confined to ritual, it was lived in every action, every relationship, every breath. And though Moses often wept at their disobedience, though he shattered the tablets in fury at their idolatry, he never stopped teaching. He never stopped pleading. He stood between the people and God again and again, not only as a prophet, but as a mediator of mercy. His teachings laid the spiritual foundation not only for Israel but for generations of prophets, scriptures, and seekers. Through Moses, the world heard what it had never heard before: the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. This was his message. This was his calling. This was his legacy. Challenges and opposition. Moses did not walk a path of ease. Though he spoke with God face to face, though he bore miracles in his hands and law in his heart, his journey was one of relentless trial, of bitter resistance, of burdens no man was born to carry. His opposition came not only from tyrants and rebels but from within his own people. The first wall he faced was Pharaoh, king of Egypt, God in the eyes of men, tyrant in the eyes of heaven. When Moses stood in his court and declared, "Let my people go," Pharaoh laughed. He did not see a prophet, he saw a runaway slave returned in defiance. He challenged not only Moses' authority but the God who sent him. Each plague that followed hardened Pharaoh's heart further. Blood in the rivers, frogs in the palace, boils on the skin, darkness across the land, still he defied. His sorcerers mocked, his priests resisted, his armies watched from behind golden masks. Even as his kingdom unraveled, he clung to pride. Moses stood again and again in the court of death, knowing the price could be his own life. But Pharaoh was not the only enemy. His own people turned against him. In Egypt, they cried out for deliverance. In the wilderness, they cried out for Egypt. They complained of food, of thirst, of heat, of distance. When Moses went up Mount Sinai to meet with God, they grew impatient and turned to idolatry, forging a golden calf, proclaiming it as the God that led them out of Egypt. Moses descended from the mountain, the tablets of the covenant in his hands, and when he saw the calf, the dancing, the madness, he shattered the stone in fury and heartbreak. His face, shining with the glory of God, was a witness to how far the people had fallen. At times, the opposition was not just rebellion, it was personal betrayal. His own sister, Miriam, and brother, Aaron, once questioned his authority. Has the Lord spoken only through Moses, they asked, their hearts poisoned by jealousy. God himself responded, defending his prophet, striking Miriam with leprosy, only to heal her after Moses begged in mercy. There were uprisings in the camp Korah's rebellion, when priests and leaders gathered to defy Moses and claim equal right to lead. The ground split open, swallowing the rebels. But the murmurs of discontent never ceased. And through it all, Moses bore the weight alone. He cried out to God, not once, but many times, saying, "Why have you laid the burden of all these people upon me? I am not able to carry all this alone. It is too heavy for me." God responded not with scorn, but with support. He appointed 70 elders to share the burden. He gave manna from heaven, water from rock, quail in the wind. But the greatest trial remained. The people's hearts were never fully free, even though their bodies had left Egypt. And then came his final, most painful challenge. In a moment of frustration, when the people again cried out for water, God commanded Moses to speak to the rock. But Moses, weary and angry, struck it instead twice. Water flowed, but the act cost him dearly. God said, "Because you did not trust me enough to honor me as holy, you will not bring this assembly into the promised land." It was a quiet judgment. Moses, the man who had split the sea, who had ascended the mountain, who had stood alone against kings, would not enter the land he had led them toward. His opposition came from Pharaoh, from idolaters, from rebels and traitors, but also from the crushing expectations of a people who demanded miracles while refusing obedience. Yet through every trial, he never abandoned them. He remained their prophet, their intercessor, their leader in storms, their voice in silence. The challenges of Moses were not merely historical, they were spiritual. They were the tests of a man called to lead not perfect people, but a broken nation, toward a holy promise. Legacy and impact. Centuries have passed. Empires have fallen. Languages have died. But the name of Moses remains untouched by dust, undimmed by time, thunderous in its silence and sacred in its echo. He did not build cities. He did not leave behind statues or temples carved in stone. He left something greater, a covenant, a law, and a living memory burned into the conscience of the world. Moses' impact began not with a victory on the battlefield, but with a voice on a mountain declaring that the God of all creation had spoken, and his words were not for kings or priests alone, but for the people. For slaves. For wanderers. For all who longed for truth. He delivered to Israel a way of life, not just commands, but a divine structure of justice, holiness, mercy, and obedience. The 10 Commandments, once carried down from Mount Sinai in trembling hands, became the moral cornerstone of civilizations to come. Through him, law was no longer a tool of tyrants, but a sacred bond between heaven and earth. His shadow stretched beyond the wilderness. He became the standard by which all future prophets would be measured. When other messengers came, they came carrying echoes of his mission, calling for repentance, justice, and divine faithfulness. His name was spoken in reverence by prophets like Isaiah, Jeremiah, and even John the Baptist. In times of exile and despair, the Israelites did not look to their kings, they remembered Moses. In Babylonian captivity, they recited his words. In foreign lands, they opened scrolls and reread the journey from Egypt to Sinai to Canaan. They kept the festivals he taught, recited the prayers he gave, and walked the path he blazed, even in chains. But his legacy was not Israel's alone. Across continents and centuries, the life of Moses would become a source of awe to millions. Artists painted him with rays of glory. Poets wrote verses that bore his name. Legislators carved his commandments above courtrooms. And revolutionaries whispered his story before daring to face their own pharaohs. Even the Quran, revealed centuries later, mentions Moses more than any other prophet, a clear sign of his unmatched role in sacred history. But Moses' greatest impact was not written in scrolls. It was in the unseen, in the child who hears the story of the sea opening and dares to believe in miracles. In the prisoner who remembers the Exodus and clings to the hope of freedom. In the seeker who reads the law and learns that holiness is possible, even in a broken world. Moses did not enter the promised land, but he led countless souls to the threshold of truth. He died on a mountain. But his legacy rose higher than its peaks. And still, whenever tyranny rises, whenever chains rattle, whenever a people cry out for deliverance, the voice of Moses is heard once more, "Let my people go." Death and burial. He had led them through fire, through sea, through rebellion, through desert. He had stood alone before kings and knelt alone before God. He had heard the divine voice not once, but many times. Yet now, at the edge of promise, Moses stood alone one final time. He was 120 years old, yet his eyes were not dim, and his strength had not faded. His voice still rang with power. His memory still held every law, every name, every step from Egypt to Canaan. But his journey, though sacred, was not to end in the land he had led others toward. God had told him plainly, "You shall see the land from a distance, but you shall not go there." So Moses climbed Mount Nebo, rising high above the plains of Moab. From its peak, Pisgah, the world stretched before him. There, in the clear stillness of that sacred summit, God showed him the entire land from Gilead to Dan, from Naphtali to Ephraim and Judah, from the western sea to the Negev, and beyond. And Moses looked upon it all. Not with bitterness but with peace. He saw the land promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The land his people would now enter. A land of milk and honey, of vineyards they had not planted and cities they had not built but which were theirs by divine oath. No crowd gathered to watch him ascend the mountain. No songs were sung. No monuments awaited him. Only the presence of God. It was here, with no witness but the Almighty, that Moses died. The scriptures are clear, yet silent in reverence, and Moses the servant of the Lord died there in the land of Moab, according to the word of the Lord. He buried him in a valley in the land of Moab, opposite Beth-peor, but no one knows his burial place to this day. Deuteronomy 34:5, 6. God himself buried Moses. Not a prophet. Not a priest. Not a king. The Creator of heaven and earth laid to rest the one he had called my servant, my friend, the one who spoke with him face to face. No tomb holds his bones. No stone marks his resting place. Because Moses does not belong to a place, he belongs to all of time. The people mourned for 30 days in the plains of Moab. Joshua, his appointed successor, rose to lead, but no prophet ever arose in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew intimately, who performed signs and wonders, who brought law from the mountain, and who walked between glory and dust with equal reverence. Moses' death was not an end. It was a passage. He passed not only from life to death but from earth to eternity, from leadership to legacy. He had once been drawn from water. Now he was drawn into mystery. And though no man knows his grave, every soul that walks the path of faith, justice, and obedience walks in his shadow. Interfaith perspective. Across the world's great Abrahamic faiths, few figures command such deep reverence, authority, and spiritual admiration as Moses. Though centuries divide the scroll, the Gospel, and the Quran, the name of Moses, Moshe in Hebrew, Musa in Arabic, echoes in all three like the beat of a sacred drum. His life, message, and legacy serve not only as historical memory, but as a living connection between Jews, Christians, and Muslims, a shared prophet across three sacred traditions. Judaism, the first and greatest prophet. In Judaism, Moses is the greatest prophet who ever lived. He is not only the central figure in the Torah, the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible, but also the chosen one who led the Israelites out of slavery, received the law at Sinai, and established Israel's covenant with God. He is called Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, our teacher. The Exodus is not merely a historical moment, it is a foundational identity. Every Passover, Jews remember how God, through Moses, delivered their ancestors from Pharaoh's grip. The 10 Commandments, given through Moses, remain the core of Jewish ethics and law. Deuteronomy 34 declares, "Since then, no prophet has risen in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face." For Jews, Moses is the original lawgiver, the deliverer, the shepherd of a people through both miracles and wilderness. He is the ultimate servant of God. Christianity, prophet, lawgiver, and forerunner of Christ. In Christianity, Moses is also honored as a prophet and servant of God, but his role expands further as the forerunner of Christ and the giver of the law that pointed toward grace. The New Testament refers to Moses over 80 times. Jesus himself said, "If you believed Moses, you would believe me, for he wrote about me." John 5:46. Christians see Moses as a symbol of the Old Covenant. His law prepared the way for the New Covenant through Jesus Christ. The Gospel of Matthew portrays Jesus as a new Moses, teaching from a mountain, performing miracles, fulfilling the law, and establishing a new spiritual kingdom. At the Transfiguration, Moses appears beside Elijah, standing with Christ, representing the law and the prophets, testifying to Jesus' divine identity. Though Christians believe the Mosaic law was fulfilled in Christ, they still hold Moses in reverence as a man who walked with God, faced Pharaoh, and bore the light of divine truth. Islam, prophet and messenger of power. In Islam, Moses Musa is the most frequently mentioned prophet in the Quran, with his name appearing over 130 times. He is regarded as one of the greatest messengers, Rasul, a lawgiver, a servant of God, and the liberator of the children of Israel. His story is retold across numerous chapters, from his birth to his confrontation with Pharaoh, the miracles, the splitting of the sea, and the revelation at Sinai. Surah Taha and Surah Al-Qasas recount his journey with divine detail. His confrontation with Pharaoh is seen as the ultimate struggle between truth and tyranny. In Islam, Moses is praised for his steadfastness, humility, and direct communication with Allah. He is called Kalimullah, the one who spoke with God. Muslims believe that Moses brought the Torah, a divine scripture revealed to the Israelites. Though it was later altered over time, it was originally a source of light and guidance. Prophet Muhammad once said, "The people are asleep, when they die, they will awake." Among the prophets, I am the closest to Moses. A shared legacy. Despite theological differences, Moses is a bridge between past and future, justice and mercy, law and liberation. His story is etched into the spiritual DNA of billions. In synagogues, churches, and mosques, his name is spoken with reverence, his words taught with fire, and his life remembered as one of the greatest journeys ever lived. Moses does not belong to one religion, he belongs to the story of God's reach toward humanity.